Is Donald Trump going to vote for Joe Biden or just adopt his gun control proposals? Find out on this episode of The Uprising.
You get out and you create a crowd.
They are the resistance,
You push back on them.
but we are the uprising.
You ready?
I'm ready.
The man says he's ready. Tim Donner joins me today on the Uprising Podcast, a podcast of LibertyNation.com. This is Scott D. Cosenza. Thank you for joining me, Mr. Donner.
You're welcome again. I think it's good that you clarify whether it's D. Cosenza or Scott D. middle initial Cosenza.
As you state,
There's
let the people visit LibertyNation.com where they'll see it
There
in
you
print
go.
and
There
it'll
you
be
see that.
revealed in all its glory for them. I want to say right at the outset, I think for a lot of my friends, Tim, that and that's why I get my most direct feedback from the Uprising on is the people who feel confident in calling me after they listen and either maybe
and chewing you out.
maybe right. Maybe I was
Yeah.
going to say maybe congratulating, but maybe chewing
What were
me
you
out.
thinking there?
I get accused of being an apologist for Donald Trump, and
Yeah, that's very funny.
I think it's fair to say at the top of the show I'm going to be attacking Donald Trump for his really abject. Is it retreat? Is it surrender on gun control? He has said now that he wants red flag laws and he's willing to talk about increased background checks and other measures. And so it seems like he's folded on gun control. What do you think?
I think as president of the United States that Trump has to do and say some things, and he has to restrain himself from doing and saying other things. Now, I don't know that any of the things that he's done to this point are going to make a whole lot of difference because I think Republicans, look, the question is, how hard is he going to push? You say he's open to red flag laws. He's open to universal background checks. But the question is he going to fight for that?
Right? Is he going to burn a lot of political
Yeah,
calories doing
because
it?
I don't
It
think
seems like
he
he's
will.
not.
I don't think he will.
But I don't think that that's what the gun rights people thought they were electing. If we can listen now, this was Donald Trump before his election as president of the United States.
This is the most basic human right of all. I'm going to put criminals behind bars and guarantee that law-abiding Americans have the right to self-defense. 100%. Hillary wants to go into the opposite direction. She said that President Obama didn't go far enough when he executed this order, when he signed this order, and he's not going far enough. He's gone so far, he's gone too far, we're going to stop it. And we will unsign lots of different things, including some of those terrible executive orders. Believe me, they're going to be unsigned so fast, they'll be unsigned the first hour that I'm in office, in the first hour that I'm in office.
It's pretty much a rousing pro-gun speech. And not only is he going to rip out the improperly
By the way,
issued...
could you say pro-gun rights, please, instead
Sure.
of pro-gun?
Certainly.
Thing is, somebody could pluck that right out of the podcast and go, there are these right-wing reactionaries from LibertyNation.com
White supremacists.
who just love guns because
Fascist
they're
white
violent people.
supremacists.
That's pretty much
Even
it.
though the one thing that marginalized groups can do, actually, to assert their own rights, is to become armed and powerful. I mean, that's what
Well,
sort of.
It's you said it really well once, and I've repeated it with proper attribution,
Thank
of
you,
course. That what is it? Take it from the leftist perspective. What is it that protects, for example, a small gay guy walking hand in hand with another guy, and a bunch of muscle-bound thugs come up with bad intentions? What is it that levels the playing field between these soon-to-be victims and
Absolutely
their
right. It's a
attackers?
firearm.
It's a gun.
Absolutely
It's a gun.
right.
And what
That's
about
because
a
Tim,
homeowner?
one of the lead,
I mean,
one
come
of the lead plaintiffs in the case that eventually became the Heller case is Tom Palmer, who is a awesome advocate for human rights. He is a free market libertarian type who speaks around the world. He's really a remarkable guy, pro-liberty guy. and he was one of the lead plaintiffs. And he is not a particularly physically imposing gay guy who was set upon by, basically he saved his own life, or at least a really horrible beating by being armed. From people who thought, they didn't want a gay guy walking down their street,
Right,
basically.
exactly.
And
It's
that's,
the great equalizer.
We have these stories all over right now about these, and they're like women of color, transsexual women in like Atlanta, I think in Texas. The murders are out of control of these, like the most marginalized of societies. They should have guns for self-protection. We're the ones who are saying, go ahead and stand up for your rights and protect yourself. Obviously, you can't rely on the city police to protect you. They're not doing it.
So what do you say to the people who assert that red flag laws would have prevented some of these deranged shooters from ever getting a gun?
Well, let's listen to.
And it is hindsight, admittedly, but if it's true, how do you respond to that?
Well, I want to listen to the president this week.
Okay, well,
because let's again, he said that he's going to be protecting our Second Amendment rights. That's what he was selling before the election.
I have called for red flag laws, also known as extreme risk protection orders. Today, I'm also directing the Department of Justice to propose legislation ensuring that those who commit hate crimes and mass murders face the death penalty, and that this capital punishment be delivered quickly, decisively, and without years of needless delay.
Okay, so the second part first. That's an absurdity. We have more and more evidence. We're getting away from the death penalty in this country, not getting closer to it, and we're getting more into longer delays as we realize.
Trump has always been a fan of the death penalty.
It's
always been. Going right back to the Central Park Five, he called for their execution before it was discovered that while they had committed many heinous crimes in a spree of not doxing, but
wilding. Yes.
Spree of wilding. So they'd done some horrible deeds, but they didn't actually commit the murder against that person, but against the girl that big ruckus in 1989 in New York. But Trump called for the death penalty for these 5 defendants.
Yeah, so let's just, let's leave that aside for a second. I think it's preposterous in 2019 to be engaging in a campaign for more capital punishment.
Well, you got to remember, Scott, remember that you now have to look, even with a non-politician politician like Trump, you have to look at things through the lens of the 16 months that we have to go before the election. So he's thinking about his reelection, and he evidently believes, and I'm just telling you the political. He believes that
this is a populist
death
president.
Penalty. Yeah.
Well, the same thing with the gun control.
Yeah.
That's the point I'm leading to.
He believes
Tim.
that's popular.
A populist president is a dangerous president because he's not rooted in the foundation for respect for constitutional rights. And if the population, if the winds blow and they say, "Give us our guns, give us the guns."
Okay, but here's the thing. I don't think you can paint populists with a broad brush, because unlike conservatism, liberalism, whatever you want to talk about, in free market economics, Austrian economics, whatever, there's a system of belief.
Right.
Populism is limited to the proposition that we should give people what they want. But there's so many different ways to interpret it, and you've got populists like Bernie Sanders and populists like Donald Trump. So I think that it's such a huge umbrella, populism, that it's hard to define and say that all populists are this way or that way.
I've just said they're all dangerous.
And I will say
because
this,
of their
too.
lack of grounding in a fundamental respect for rights, the popular will be damned.
Well, I think it's also the other real problem with populism, and we see it with Trump too, is that there is not a commitment to limiting the size of government. Whatever the people want,
Right.
you basically are going to spend whatever it takes to give it to them. There is no commitment to reducing the size and scope of government.
There's no grounding
That's
in first principles.
right in populism, because there is no common set of principles. It's a different kind of beast than conservatism
All right, you want to
or
ask me a
classical
direct question
liberalism,
about
whatever.
red flag laws again? I feel like I didn't address it directly. I want to.
Well, Scott, red flag laws. The people who were particularly virulent in their gun grabbing point out that so many of these mass shooters could have been stopped if there were red flag laws that identified them as a danger before they got a gun as opposed to after they committed this
Yeah, many
heinous
libels,
act.
many libels would be prevented, Tim, if we could prevent people from speaking in the first place. That is true.
So it's like a prior restraint
Yeah,
thing.
it's absolutely
it really
a
is,
prior
yeah.
restraint. I mean, nobody's. I don't think that there's a serious gun rights proponent or human rights proponent, amongst which gun rights is part of the bundle. By the way, you can't have human rights without the right to practical self-defense, I would argue.
What concerns me the most is that this was a technique used famously by the Soviet Union, that they would deport people to basically concentration camps, prison camps, if you want to be nice about it, because they were deemed to be mentally ill, mentally unfit. And we know how many times people were sent
Absolutely.
to a gulag.
Yeah, the Gulag
To
Archipelago.
to a gulag
You get
for, on
if
the
you can
basis
call
of
your
using
opponent crazy.
Yeah.
You know, and they,
Yeah.
in fact, even in popular culture, I think Kanye West is a good example of this. You know, he evidences support for Donald Trump in many ways, and they call him crazy for it. It's a
Sure.
convenient way to demonize and not have to take
Kanye's
seriously
lost his mind. Don't
the
don't
arguments
pay,
of your opponent.
Yeah, pay
you
no
just
attention.
say he's crazy.
Pay
Yeah,
no
it's really
attention.
awful.
Pay no attention. He's just nuts.
Well,
yeah.
I felt like I was in a time machine back to 1988 when the president said this, Tim.
Second, we must stop the glorification of violence in our society. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace. It is too easy today for troubled youth to surround themselves with a culture that celebrates violence. We must stop or substantially reduce this, and it has to begin immediately. Cultural change is hard.
So this lie that video game
where
playing,
where did this thing start? Is there evidence that I don't know of that either the Dayton and or El Paso shooters were big video game files? I mean,
well, Tim, they're young men who live in the United States of America. So that is all the evidence you need, because that's how wildly popular these
do we
games
know
are.
that do we know that there was
know-
some kind of obsession that they had
No,
with video
no.
games?
And we know for
So I don't
sure
understand
that
it then.
there is no causal relationship between the playing of violent video games and the exhibition of violence. None. No causal link. It doesn't. You know, first of all, even if you could show a causal link, I would suggest
How would
you still
you?
have the right.
But you say
here's how
there
you-
is no correlation. Okay, so
Right.
you've made an absolute 100%
Sure.
statement. How do you back that? How do you know that there is no effect?
There is no scientific literature that well, it's the absence of evidence, right? There you go. There's no. They've tried to prove it. Okay, they've
Do you
tried to
know
prove
what
it
they
for
do-
decades and decades.
Do you know what they do? I'm actually interested in
Right.
how they might try to prove
Oh, well,
that.
here
I
you
mean,
go.
whether
For
they-
instance, you could say, where do kids play ultra-violent video games? Are there mass incidents of violence? And as a matter of fact, guess what happens in Japan and Korea, Tim? What do you think the kids like to play there? Games
I'm going to
that
make
are
a wild guess and say, let me think about this for a while. Video games?
the same ones,
I
by and
got it.
large,
How
that the
about that?
American kids like to play, okay?
Yeah, right.
But guess what they don't have? The same incidents of violence. There is no causal relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So it just doesn't exist there.
Okay, well, that's a
Um,
fair A-B
yeah.
trial. Sure.
And it's one of those things where, you know, the president, this is not like just some people as like a hobby, like programming in their off hours. The global video game market is, I don't know if it's trillions of dollars, but certainly billions and billions of dollars. This is huge. And when the president talks like that, it sounds to me like he's talking about maybe wouldn't be out of line for somebody to devalue the price of a video game stock company, the stock of a company that makes video games, for instance. On what? I mean, it's just, you know, I just think it's, again, this side kind of populism. I'll talk about these video games, and it's like, You just want to scream at them. It's not. It's about this kid.
It's
It's
very-
about this murderous kid. It's not about a video game or a gun.
Yeah, it's hard to know whether Trump, what he believes at his core about guns, because for all those years he was in New York growing up in a city that was 92% Democratic or whatever, he couldn't say what he really felt about it. And he was for gun control laws and stuff when he was in New York doing business with the likes of Chuck Schumer all the time. And the mayors of New York, most of whom were Democratic. I mean,
He's had armed security.
he's had armed
for
security, but then
decades and
and he
decades.
became a big Second Amendment supporter during the presidential campaign.
That's right.
And I thought he was pretty convincing that he believed what he said because he went well beyond what he had to do, I would say. And since then, I think he's wavering sort of between the two positions. So I'm not sure in his gut what Donald Trump really thinks about the issue
Here
of
he
guns.
is wavering on his way to get to Dayton for that whole fiasco at the hospital on the tarmac. This is about background checks.
Well, I'm looking to do background checks. I think background checks are important. I don't want to put guns into the hands of mentally unstable people or people with rage or hate, sick people. I don't want to. I'm all in favor of it. Well, I can tell you that there is no political appetite for that at this moment. If you look at, you could speak, you could do your own polling, and there's no political appetite from it from the standpoint of legislature, but I will
That's
certainly
no
bring that up.
political
I'll bring that up
appetite,
as one of the points. There's a great appetite, and I mean a very strong appetite, for background checks, and I think we can bring up background checks like we've never had before. I think both Republican and Democrat are getting close to a bill to doing something on background checks.
Okay, so Scott, give me the argument against universal background checks.
Oh, there's not just one, Tim. Let's
Well,
peel the
a
onion,
consolidated
okay?
argument. Yeah.
Well, I think that the best argument, for me, the best argument is that is a prelude to confiscation. Right now, the government doesn't know who has guns, by and large. It depends on what state a person lives in, but guns are tracked at sale for when there's a federally licensed firearms dealer. But other than that, they're not tracked federally. So a person who wants to confiscate guns from Americans has an uphill battle in doing so. The minute you institute one of these, all guns have to have a transfer system. Now there's going to be this federal database essentially of guns and who's been transferring guns to whom. And in the course of a generation or two, then you'll have a federal database of where all the guns are. And historically, that's been a prelude to confiscation, and that's one of the big things that those of us who urge against these things want to protect against, the capacity of a tyrant to seize the guns.
Okay, so you said the historical precedent you referred to. So when and under what circumstances was the universal background check or the equivalent thereof used as a predicate for then confiscating guns?
It was done most recently, I think, in New Zealand. It's been done in Australia. It's been done in the United Kingdom. It certainly was done by the Nazis. Stalin did it too. All these tyrannical regimes.
Well, they just confiscated the guns, didn't
How
they?
do they know who to
didn't-
confiscate them from?
Right,
They start
I
with
see.
a list.
Right.
You need a list
And then,
first.
so how did Stalin and Hitler? How did they develop those lists?
Oh, well, you have to register your guns. That's the first. That's how you register
Right.
your list. I mean,
Right.
you need to come. The government needs to understand who has these guns.
But certainly you're
guns.
not suggesting that the United States government would do what Hitler did or Stalin did or Mao did.
Or
are
the
you?
Austrian or the Australians or the New Zealanders. All it takes is one, bad law that before the Supreme Court can get to basically overturn it, or if they even uphold it, and then it's going to take a whole cycle for that to be corrected. But it might be too late. In other words, these liberties can sort of go away, right?
Let me play devil's advocate as I have been here. What about if
before you do that, I will add, I don't think there's going to be any safety benefit as well. So just for the record, I want to get that in, but go ahead.
universal background checks? What if they saved? If you could prove that they saved, let's say more than one life, that they would have saved, say, a dozen lives. Would it be worth it to save those 12 lives in return for the compromise of liberty? I don't ask easy questions.
How many hundreds of thousands of lives will come in the devastation that's to follow when the tyrants get hold of power in America and the citizens are toothless to defend themselves?
Now, I must say, in the climate that we're in,
Don't
and
say it can't happen
we
here.
can. Well, look, in the climate that we're in, and we're going to get into the whole white supremacy thing. I think the idea that tyrants are out for not just our guns, but all of our liberty and our free speech and our First
Our very
Amendment and
lives.
our
We
very
sit here
lives.
occupying this occupying this Indian territory that we
I think you have to
that we
dismiss.
occupy,
I think
or
you have
Native
to.
American.
I think you have to dismiss the idea that it's over the top at this point in time to say that
absolutely.
forming a list, the government creating a list of everyone that owns guns. Owns guns. I mean,
At
if
the
you-
moment of
what would
crisis,
Elizabeth Warren do with that? What would she do with that?
At the moment of crisis is precisely when we have to hold on to our liberty as tight as we can, because that's the time when it's easiest for tyrants to pry it from people's arms.
Well stated. Well stated. I can't argue with that. This is an opportunity for the tyrants, for the people who don't love liberty but who love tyranny.
Let's blame video games. Let's blame guns.
Yeah.
Let's blame the culture.
Yeah, I don't know
this
where
is
the,
about a kid who's a murderous. You know, I assume that he is, crazy, mentally ill beyond measure.
I think we don't go deep enough into this because, I want to look at social media as a cause of this stuff. And people looking at other people's profiles and their lives on social media and thinking that they're lost.
Right, yeah.
They didn't get any of these benefits. Everybody else has this great life,
Right.
and they're a total loser. And the only way to get attention is to go out and off a bunch of people.
Well, I don't know if there's any evidence to suggest these people are social media.
I don't know
nuts
either,
or what.
but I think it does create an environment on the internet that is very, very volatile, much more volatile than it ever was before the days of the internet. And Scott, the number of mass murders has increased astronomically in the last, especially in the last 8 years, the last 8 or 9 years. The number of mass murders has increased dramatically, just as social media was becoming a permanent and outsized fixture in the American.
Right.
Now, look, two things can happen.
You can social media can have a
understand
deleterious
that,
effect on the culture and not
yeah,
cause.
I understand,
cause
and
mass
I'm
murder.
not saying that that's
Yeah.
necessary. That's not like the rooster crows and the sun comes up, so
Right,
the rooster
right.
caused the sun to come up.
Uh-huh.
But
The
what
car-
I'm saying
the
is
cargo
that
cults.
I mean, anybody can say anything, anytime with a veil of anonymity, and they can go on the internet and act like they are something that they aren't. And this is something that's new in the last 25 years.
Well,
in
we
this
also
society.
have this fanning the flames of hate that I think is a real problem. I think it's become it may actually be important to differentiate between who is a fascist, white supremacist, and who isn't. And it seems like we're getting into a point where we're making it harder and harder to do that.
Well, if you heard the hysterical reaction this week and the way that the media and leftists and Democratic presidential candidates, but then I repeat myself, the way that they pounced on this for political gain in a desperate attempt to make Trump
and
look
before
like
we do that,
he's responsible
And before
for
we
it.
do that, I want to say this. I hate President Trump's policy on this. I think it's a bad move. I think it betrays his political backers in the form of gun rights proponents and those NRA members who, by the way, are dealing with a problem right now internally with the NRA.
Yes.
There's a real struggle with, whether it's real or not, there's allegations of financial impropriety with board members resigning. They're in a weakened state
Yes,
right
they
now.
are.
And they need a president who can buoy them and not really kind of need to be pushed by them, but to lead them. And that's not what we've got here. I think I think that's a real problem. But anyway, while I do hate all that, this notion that Trump, this is part, I've been saying it, Tim, since we started with this president. There's so many great reasons to attack this guy. Let's attack him on the real things that matter. So for anybody who thinks that President Trump has somehow dog whistle with hate groups or whatever, this kind of insane belief, I think, here he is on hate. And I tell you, you listen to these words and tell me they couldn't be spoken by Barack Hussein Obama just as well.
The shooter in El Paso posted a manifesto online consumed by racist hate. In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no place in America. Hatred warps the mind, ravages the heart, and devours the soul.
And the problem you have with that is what?
I don't have a problem with it.
Oh, I thought you did.
No, the point is,
You said it could have been Obama.
yeah, I'm saying people who think that President Trump is some kind of hate baiter.
Oh, you're going the other
where
way
is
with
the
it. I
hate-
think you're saying
yeah.
he's doing what a president does when this
Obama
kind of thing
himself
happens.
could have
Yes.
said, you could have put his words in that.
Yeah.
That would have been his announcement for the shooting.
That's true. But of course, now what the left has done is they've taken those words and done exactly what you would have expected, is to say he didn't really mean it. Of course he didn't mean it. It's just a sop. Now, I've debated today whether I wanted the outrageous sound bites that I've got lined up here. And you can decide. Do we want to start with the banner one first, like the headline one first, and then go through the rest? Or do we want to build to Frank Figliuzzi? Because nothing gets... it leaves me speechless. But
Well,
that's the ultimate
Why don't we just
soundbite.
go ahead and get Frank teed up and
Okay. All right.
go right to the center of the Tootsie Pop?
All right. So this guy used to be an assistant director of the FBI counterterrorism division.
Okay.
So this guy was a fairly high-ranking guy. And now he's latched onto MSNBC, and he's an extreme never-Trumper.
Right.
I mean, he just
Wait a second.
hates the guy.
You're telling me an FBI person who didn't support Donald Trump?
Shocking
Where
as
have
that might be.
Where have I heard about that kind of
So
thing
he
before?
had a theory about Donald Trump putting the flag at half-mast
Oh,
for the
sure,
victims of El Paso and Dayton. And I can't...
I got the double OK symbols out
not
right
even
now. There
that.
you
No,
go.
well beyond that, Scott. Here it is.
The president said that we will fly our flags at half-mast until August 8th. That's 8-8. The numbers 8-8 are very significant in neo-Nazi and white supremacy movement.
There you go.
Why? Because the letter H is the 8th letter of the alphabet, and to them, the numbers 8-8 together stand for Heil Hitler. So we're going to be raising the flag back up at dusk on 8-8.
Every white supremacist knows, Tim, that you lower the flag on 8-6 and raise it back up on
Everybody knows
8-8,
it.
and that
It's
means
just a dog whistle,
this
Scott.
is. I mean, I can read you right from the last page of Mein Kampf. Hitler says, to honor my memory, on August the 8th.
But this is a
Please
guy.
go ahead.
This is a guy who's on a.
And by the way, just for the record, if people don't know it, that's preposterous. What the man said is preposterous. It's just something he completely made up.
I didn't need you to say that.
No, I'm telling the
but-
audience, Tim. I mean, just in case. There's
that
like,
is. But
people
think
don't
about-
necessarily know there's not some real thing out there. That
Now-
this guy didn't just make it up.
Does this guy not have a mental illness to believe something like
What's
this?
his name, Frank what?
Frank Figliuzzi.
Frank Figliuzzi.
He's one of your Italian brothers.
Hey, listen.
Scott, you should know about him.
Maybe it's just he's adopted or something.
But
I
think
don't know.
about what he just said. On MSNBC, this is not on some
Oh, yeah.
dark corner of
Well,
the internet.
They're comfortable with. That's the network that ran Russian collusion stories for a couple of years. So
So after
they probably still are.
after Trump gave the speech, which, as you said, it's a fairly conventional type of speech for a president who's trying to
standard,
comfort the
yes.
victims and the
even
families
good.
of
In other words, and
yeah.
even not just wrote, but a good one.
yeah. So how does the left react? Oh, well, of course they said he doesn't mean it. We all knew they'd do that. But let's talk about some of the specific stuff that they said in no particular order. I'm going to go to
Well, before you go to anything, I want to talk about the worst thing that was said this week by the left, and it's about this Donald Trump business.
Was it worse than what Frank Figliuzzi just said? That
Yeah.
that he's sending a dog whistles
Like
over
100-year-old.
national TV.
I actually printed out a tweet. It's this Joaquin Castro tweet.
Oh, Joaquin Castro.
Joaquin Castro
Please get
tweet.
the correct pronunciation.
Sad to see so many San Antonians as 2019 maximum donors to Donald Trump, and then he identifies the owner of Bill Miller Barbecue, a realtor, Phyllis Browning, and then here's this thing: who's funding Trump, right? With their names,
Right.
and their towns and their employers.
Exactly.
So
He
a
doxed them.
congressman,
He's doxing
a congressman
people.
wants you to call these people's employers and basically say what they're pieces of crap who should be fired because they donated politically to Donald Trump.
This is how bad it was. How bad was it? Johnny Carson used to say. Or actually, Ed McMahon would say that, and Johnny Carson would say it was so bad that fill in the blank. It was so bad, Scott, that even on MSNBC, one Willie Geist took Joaquin Castro to task about it.
But Congressman, as you look at this list, I know you said you didn't put their addresses out there. It's easy to find them. These people undoubtedly are already being harassed online or perhaps face-to-face in some cases. What do you say to those people this morning who said, I made a campaign donation and now I'm going to be harassed? I'm going to have people protesting outside my business or perhaps even my home. Do you want them to repent for their support for Donald Trump, or what do you want from them?
Well, the first thing is that I don't want anybody harassed or
But
targeted.
they will be because you put their names in public.
Like that was not my intention.
But that's
these
what
things are
happened.
these things are public. No, what I would like for them to do is think twice about supporting a
That's
guy
right.
who is
Think
fueling
twice
hate
about
in this
writing that
country.
check. Tim,
Yeah, I
you have
mean-
to think twice about it because if not, the mobs are coming to your house.
The mobs.
They're going to call your employer. They're going to
mobs.
get you fired.
The mobs.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it
twice.
is.
He actually told the truth within his lie.
Well,
you know?
well, the truth is in the joke or in the condemnation, right? In other words, I'll tell you what, these people are masters of taking one little speck of information and expanding it into a
Well, they're just
universal
lying.
reality.
Yeah, they're just
I
willing
mean-
to lie out of whole cloth.
And then now there was another incident this week. I mean, this was unbelievable. The New York Times switched their headline because, and I'm going to get you the exact,
Let me just stop you for a second and just say, how do you think that society's devolved to the point where there's actual violence in the streets? I mean, I don't think that Mr. Castro's tweet is a far cry from a first step to that, or maybe even more than a first step. But when you announce these people, basically like they're the ones who to go after. This is a target list.
That is exactly what it is. It's inviting violence. That was that was MSNBC that was saying, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't Fox News we're talking about. And so, that shows you they cannot stop themselves
stop
from,
this.
from literally psychotic behavior, sociopathic behavior. This is what it is. So now the New York Times,
The old gray lady.
the old gray leftist lady,
Mm-hmm. Pinch Sulzberger's blog.
the old Pinchmeister.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so the original headline after Trump gave his speech was, Trump urges unity versus racism. That's pretty much exactly what he did.
Sure.
Correct?
But it's too pro-Trump.
So
or it's not anti-Trump.
that's exactly right. So you
Right.
had heavyweights like Kirsten Gillibrand
Right.
and
That's
Cory
not,
Booker.
That's not journalism justice.
Yeah, right. So you had like Gillibrand and Booker, who had like 2%, or she's below 1% in the presidential race, trying to pounce on this. And then AOC pounces on and says, how dare the New York Times put a headline like that? So they changed the headline.
Yeah.
They changed it to, okay, let me again just indicate again what the original headline was. Trump urges unity versus racism. Now, after they got hung out to dry and put through the ringer by all their leftist friends, the headline changed to assailing hate but not guns.
Okay.
On the front page, assailing hate but not guns, which is a completely different headline than Trump urges unity versus racism. But they absolutely just caved, absolutely caved. And Donald Trump Jr. went on Fox. He talked about it.
They put up actually what happened, an objective headline, and then they were hit by the mob. And the mob went after them, and they caved to that pressure. They caved to the Twitter mob and gave their viewers what they wanted as opposed to the actual news. And that's a scary place to be. The New York Times doesn't function as a news organization anymore. They function as the marketing wing of the Democrat Party. So does the Washington Post and, frankly, most of the mainstream media. And that's what it is. It's not about reporting what actually happens. It's not about being objective in that. It's about driving forward a political agenda. In their case, obviously, a very leftist political agenda. And it's sick because there is no amount of effort, no amount of statement that my father could give that would ever satisfy them.
Okay, so the point that he makes, even though you were getting itchy on the trigger finger to get rid of it, is that he makes the point that nothing this president does will
he needs to resign.
Will ever satisfy the left,
resignation.
short of resignation.
Maybe that.
Short
No,
of,
I just wanted to speed through it because I think that it's a given.
it's a given.
They
Yeah, I know
have
it
the
is.
New York
Yeah.
Times has completely eschewed any kind of objectivity or veneer of fairness or something other than just being they're on team. What is it? I always forget the Reds and the Blue. They're on excuse me, Team Blue. That's
Team
it.
Blue, Team Blue. But
that's
then
their number one thing.
But then there was the midget, Beto O'Rourke.
We have a president right now who traffics in this hatred,
Little person.
who incites this violence, who calls asylum seekers animals and an infestation. You may call a cockroach an infestation. You may use that word in the Third Reich to describe those who are undesirable, who must be put down because they are subhuman, with this beautiful country that decided 243 years ago that we would not define ourselves by race or ethnicity.
Now listen to that. He said we would not define ourselves by race and
so
ethnicity,
warming.
which is exactly
So
what they're doing on the left.
And
one
this thing that Beto O'Rourke can be counted on is not to bring race
into
or ethnicity
question.
into the
It's-
conversation.
Talk about projection.
Well,
Projection. They're projecting onto Trump and the Republicans what
insanity.
they're doing themselves.
They are all about race.
By the way, did you know why he's called Beto?
Yeah, because of electability.
No,
the father gave him the nickname.
No,
or the stepfather.
No,
who was it?
No, this is delicious.
Okay, I read a story about it once. I thought it was for.
It was actually the maid that worked for his
Oh.
well-heeled,
Got
white
it.
privileged
Uh-huh.
family that said, "Oh, little Beto,"
Right.
and it
It's-
took from there. So,
right.
you think he's going to tell all of his Hispanic
Right.
constituents that, "Oh, the maid named me
Right.
Beto. That's why I'm Beto."
Right.
I hope that's a piece of information that our listeners will take and use liberally.
Well, yeah. This is a guy whose raison d'etre is race, class, race, and then some
apologizing
sex, and then
for
some
being
sex
and
thrown into
apologizing
it.
for being white.
Well, absolutely. We had I don't know if it was I can't remember who even tweeted. There was some widely publicized tweet. It was Rosanna Arquette, I think it was, who published this apology for whiteness.
Yeah.
It's just like one of these.
I'm sorry for being Caucasian.
All right. By the way, you don't get to blame other people because something bad happened to you, and that was the person's skin color. Just like you can't say you're against black people if a black guy, stole your car. Like, it's about the person who actually did the thing, not the color of their skin.
Now we move on. Because I'm going to get this in.
All right, go ahead.
And I am the Joe Biden correspondent.
Yes, you are.
Okay. So Biden just, just
Tim, that's
laced
your
into
sole
Trump.
purpose
I know.
for being here.
It's my sole
to
means
enlighten
of
everyone
survival.
about
yeah.
the former,
I
the
make a li-
immediate
I-
past vice president and
Thank you.
his quest to become the future president of the United States.
By the
Go
way,
ahead.
I don't think that you're required to use former and immediate past
It's
consecutively
not-
as
it's not a-
adjectives.
I don't do the minimum.
Let's see.
Okay.
Oh, always above and beyond the Call of Duty. I
Go
should have
ahead.
known that you would do that. So Joe Biden, so he gets up there and talks about Trump not having the moral authority. This guy whose son benefited from his father's largesse, using his connections as vice
Well, we don't
president
know
to
that
put
to
to
be
put
true.
to
Come
put
on now.
millions of dollars in his son's pocket because of his position as
Those
vice
kids would have
president,
been-
Ukraine and China. Okay, so I throw it all out there, but he's going to stand up there and tell us that this president is morally repugnant.
The words of a president matters. They can encourage us to appeal to our better angels, to our better nature, but they can also unleash the deepest, darkest forces in this nation.
Here
And
we go.
that's what I believe Donald Trump has chosen to do. He called a major American city, a disgusting, rat-infected rodent mess, as though
He stumbled on
the
it.
vibrant, diverse community around Baltimore somehow was less than human. He basked in the chants of "send her back." The shooter in El Paso declaring, quote, "This attack is a response to Hispanic invasion of Texas." It's both clear language and in code. This president has fanned the flames of white supremacy in this nation.
Okay, so there it is. Code language again. There's these hidden codes, just like Frank Figliuzzi said. Of course, Biden didn't go quite that far, but I want to listen to that part again where he stumbles over the insult of Trump. Let me just play this guy.
Donald Trump has chosen to do. He called a major American city, a disgusting, rat-infected rodent mess.
Okay, he couldn't even get the
No,
insult right. He
and
completely
infested
botched.
is the word that they had a conniption
Infected
fit over.
as opposed to infested.
Well, no,
He couldn't
infested
even
is
get that
supposed
right.
to be a racist word, even though
Right. But
there's
Biden
plenty
couldn't
of
repeat it.
examples of leftists calling. In fact, I think there's a Bernie Sanders clip where he calls Baltimore drug infested. This is from years ago.
There's a clip of Elijah Cummings,
Right.
who represents the district, who is
Saying
the
it's
subject of
drug
it,
infested.
saying that it's drug infested.
Yeah.
So,
It's-
come on.
It's entirely
Let's be real.
a bunch of BS. It's nice that that Uncle Joe though couldn't even get out. That's the thing. If you have the zinger, right, and you can't land the zinger, it actually is like sort of double bad.
No, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, you gotta pull it off
'Cause
smoothly,
you
and
just
then
look
people
older.
go, "Whoa, he really got
Well,
him."
you do a
but,
couple more of
yeah.
those things, and then now his age, instead of being a footnote, becomes a real is he half a step?
Yeah.
Behind?
I mean, this has been.
And if you're a Democrat, aren't you mindful of? Don't you want 8 years going forward with your president? Meaning, like, what's Joe's mind going to be like if he's half a step slower now? What's it going to be like plus 7 years?
We've laughed about Joe Biden up to now because he's such a buffoon and he's so hopelessly inept. But when he starts getting into the land of calling Donald Trump someone who fans the flames of white supremacy, now we're not laughing at him anymore. This guy does not deserve to be laughed at. He needs to be crushed because he is a hypocrite of the highest order, standing there in his moral authority. Joe Biden.
Look, the violence he did to America with the crime bill alone, as far as I'm concerned, I've cried over Joe Biden's policies much. The laughing is only a response to what else are you going to do about it. No, he is a monster when it comes to the liberty of Americans. He's got an insatiable appetite for power. He's willing to basically just trounce rights willy-nilly to get it. And that's where his comfort level lies.
You want to get a couple more deranged leftist sound bites before we leave,
Go right
or
ahead.
you had enough? Okay, here's Malcolm Nance. Talk about conspiracy theories. Malcolm Nance on where else? MSNBC.
This country has had several of these mass incidents, but I think we're overdue for a real massacre of a political nature. These people feel that they are the foot soldiers and executors of what the
Anytime it's foot soldiers,
disenfranchisement that
it's
the
bad
white race
news
is
right there.
feeling, and Donald Trump is giving them subliminal orders
Subliminal!
in their head.
There it is.
How does he
Again,
detect the
this is
subliminal orders?
See, this is the talking
How
point that
does he-
obviously went out to everybody this week because we're all talking about dog whistles and codes and subliminal orders.
Now
So
there's
this
subliminal
is the talking
orders.
point. There's the talking point, and they're all going.
Well, that actually gets back to Trump's kids' argument, which is how do you defend against the subliminal dog whistle orders? I mean, they just make up. You can't defend against it.
You surrender.
Well, that's what you say. You say no. There were no subliminal. I mean, that's the only thing you can do, right? No, I didn't subliminally order white nationalists, white supremacists to do what? I don't even know what the orders are. What are they? Go to Walmart and shoot some people?
Now, I got one more. Now, this one isn't about Trump.
Okay.
It's about Mitch McConnell.
Cocaine Mitch.
Cocaine. Yeah, that whole thing is said. Is there any guy that would seem less likely to have ever ingested a drug than Mitch McConnell?
No.
Anybody who's
No.
more stiff and upright than him?
Yeah. He needs it. He needs the help.
This is Representative Ruben Gallego, congressman from Arizona, Democrat, of course, talking about Mitch McConnell in the wake of McConnell refusing to support universal background checks and other
Being
such
a white
gun
supremacist,
control
basically. Just
measures.
Yeah.
The one thing that's very consistent about Mitch McConnell, he could care less about anybody in this country except for himself and his donors. And he is the Grim Reaper. It's because of his actions that he's caused so many deaths in this country by stopping common sense gun reform laws from getting to the floor.
Grim Reaper.
He
He's
actually carries a list.
He's an instrument of
He
death.
carries a list. It says Mitch McConnell at the top, and
Yes.
then the list of his donors. And then he finds out, if a piece of legislation is going to help one of them, and then he'll say yes, and if not, no.
Do you think that this doxing thing that Joaquin Castro started, I mean, do you think that's going to become a trend now, or did he get so condemned
speaking
that,
of
that he
McConnell,
can't
they,
do
they
that?
went to McConnell's house, right?
Yeah, they did.
He had the protesters
Yes,
at
he
his
did.
house.
Yeah.
And in fact,
Yeah.
if I recall correctly, his Twitter account, did you hear about this? So his campaign's Twitter account, broadcast how, these protesters chanting off with his head and stuff like that at his house, and they suspended the campaign's Twitter account, right? They were the ones issuing terroristic threats because they're broadcasting these threats that McConnell's received. That's where we are.
That's where we are. And, well, Scott, the idea of a cold civil war, we talked about it a few weeks ago. After this week, I mean, I think we're in this cold civil war. We are in it because this kind of rhetoric, this can't last long without a serious explosion.
It better stay cold because...
I agree. I mean, that's to say I'd welcome just sustaining a cold civil war rather than going to hot. That shows you really the kind of state we're in.
It seems like every week we get closer and closer to the point where it will be that hot civil war. And the answer that libertarians have for the world, Tim, is that the less power and influence the government has, the less people need to fight about what goes on in government. If we reduce these things to civil society, if the people taking care of people who come into this country without pennies are charitable groups that we can donate to and support with our own good works, then it becomes a burden that's not placed involuntarily on your neighbor, and it's not going to be in your neighbor's interest to fight tooth and nail for it. It's this concentration of power and spending, right? Who's going to get all this dough and who's going to get their rights taken and readjusted? That's the problem, this concentration of government power. We don't see this in societies where the power it belongs to the people.
And the problem is that those who want bigger and bigger and more powerful and more expansive government, it's a full-time project for them. For us, we just want to be left alone. We don't want the government to do more. We don't want more intrusive laws. We don't want more regulations. We don't want more taxes. We don't want the government doing a lot more things. But that kind of position is inherently defensive. Those that favor huge government are inherently on the offensive because government is their god, Scott. Government is their god.
Never believe anybody who tells you it's a good idea to give away your guns when they got guns themselves. You first.
Amen.
That's it. Thanks so much for joining us on this episode of The Uprising. Please visit libertynation.com for all your conservatarian news and analysis, 24/7, 365. Tim, what do they have to do to show that they're supporters of the show?
Like and subscribe.
There you go. And comment, too, if you want. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You get out and you create a crowd.
They are the resistance.
You push back on them.
But we are the uprising.